Hi, welcome to our next YouTube tutorial. In this crash course, we will be talking about HTML. If you're an absolute beginner in web development, or maybe you already have some knowledge about HTML, then this is the right course for you. We're going to start from the absolute scratch and we will cover all the main concepts and topics about HTML. The very first question that we have to answer is, of course, the following: what is HTML? So let's go ahead and discuss briefly what HTML actually is, what it stands for, and what its main job. If there is anyone who wants to start to learn web development, it is impossible to do that without starting with HTML. It's very simple to learn, but at the same time, it's extremely important to know. So HTML, the abbreviation itself, stands for Hypertext Markup Language. The first thing that you have to keep in mind is that HTML is not a programming language. You cannot program anything at any level using HTML. In general, every programming language works based on some logic. For example, in case of conditional statements, if some condition is true, then we do one thing, and if the condition is false, then we do another thing. In HTML, we don't have such stuff. So it is a static language and it's used to build blocks of the web page. In other words, it describes the structure of your web page. The content that is represented by, let's say, headings, paragraphs, images, lists, input elements, and so on, is created with HTML. If you visit any website, the content that you will find, for example, the information that comes from the server, is rendered as the HTML document. Behind the scenes of every website, there might be lots of different logic, lots of different work, but eventually, as a result, every user sees the information represented by the HTML document. So I believe you guess very well how important it is to know HTML, and the good news that we already have mentioned is that it's really simple to learn and use. Nowadays, the current version of HTML is HTML5, so HTML4 is already the past, and throughout this tutorial we will be using, of course, HTML5. In order to use HTML, we don't need any server or some kind of compiler, because the browser is able to read and display HTML document without any help of other tools. HTML files should have .html extensions. All the elements are represented by tags, but browsers do not display those tags, they use them to display the content of the page. Alright, so that was a little introduction about what HTML is and what it is used for. Now it's the practice time. We can create our very first basic HTML document. Before we do that, I'm going to show what tools do we need to write and run HTML. We will need the modern web browser and the text editor. Throughout this tutorial, I'm going to use Google Chrome and Visual Studio Code. I'm sure you already know about Google Chrome. As for the VS Code, it's one of the best text editors today. In order to install it, you have to go to the code.visualstudio.com and download the installer. The installation process is quite simple, so I'm not going to go through it. Alright, hopefully you have downloaded and installed the VS Code successfully. Let's go ahead and create a new folder on the desktop. I'm going to call it HTML Crash Course. Then inside it, let's create a new file with the name index.html. As you remember, I said that each HTML file should have a .html extension. Actually, there might be a chance that you could not see the extension of the file by default. In order to make it visible, you have to go to View, and then you have to make sure that this little box is checked here. Once you check this box, then as the extension of the file, you might see .txt, .txt, and you just need to get rid of it. Alright, once you name the file correctly, let's go ahead and open it with your text editor. In our case, I'm going to open it with the VS Code. Let's drop the folder into the editor. Actually, you are able to create a file from your text editor as well. For that, you can either click this little icon here, or by right click you can choose a new file. Okay, let's go ahead and insert here some content. Let's say hi there. In order to run this file in the browser, I'm going to use one of the packages called Live Server, which actually allows us to run the code without reloading the page each time. So let's go ahead and install this package. Once you do that, then you can use right click and choose Open with Live Server. So as you can see, a new tab is open in the browser and we can find here hi there. Actually, I'm going to organize our working environment. Let's place editor and browser side by side in order to make our working process more convenient. Okay, so we displayed some content successfully on the page, but this is just the plain text and it doesn't give you anything much. Alright, let's go ahead and start building a basic HTML document. The first tag that we have to create is called doctype. Actually, it is a declaration that represents the type of the document. It tells the browser that the page represents an HTML5 document. As you see, I have typed doctype in uppercase, but it's not case sensitive. It's just the convention to write it in uppercase. Okay, so the doctype is followed by the HTML tag. As you can see, the text editor helped us and it auto-completed the element. I mean, it added to the HTML element the closing tag. By the way, in HTML, most of the elements have opening and closing tags. Closing tags are represented with a /. Besides them, we also have a couple of self-closing tags and you will meet them throughout this tutorial. Alright, so the HTML element is used to wrap the entire HTML document. Next we have to create another element which is called the head. This element includes information such as a title for the document. Also we can insert inside of it scripts, styles, some meta tags and also links for different files or sources. Everything that we insert inside of the head element is not going to be displayed on the page. Alright, let's go ahead and open title tag. And as the content, let's write here basic HTML document. Okay, let's save using Ctrl+S. So as you can see, the web page is empty for now because we haven't created any content yet. The only thing that we can see here is the title, which is displayed in the top here. So that's the place where the title of your web page is going to be displayed. Okay, so in order to create and display the content of your web page, first of all, you have to insert the body tag in your HTML document. This will wrap the entire content of the web page. I mean the content that is going to be visible. So for example, if we insert here some text, let's say hello world, and then if we save it, it's going to be displayed on the page. So again, everything that you pass in the body element is always visible on the page. Alright, so that's the basic structure of HTML document. Those are the main elements and tags which you need to create in order to make your HTML document work properly. Now I'm going to show you one more thing. In VS Code there is a built-in package called Amat. If you are using a different text editor, then you should install it manually from the extension manager. So Amat allows us to create an element with some shortcuts, and using it we can create the basic HTML structure with just a single simple step. Let's delete everything, then place the exclamation mark. So if I hit the tab or enter, then it will automatically generate the basic structure of the HTML document. At a glance, you can see that it is a little bit different from what we have created in this video. You see here some other elements and tags, I mean some meta tags. Also inside the HTML tag there is specified a language as English. Basically, the meta tag provides some metadata about the HTML document. They are used to specify, for example, page description, some keywords which you need for search engine optimization, and also some other metadata. In our case, the VS Code has generated 3 different meta tags. The first one, char_set attribute, specifies the character encoding for the HTML document. The second one is used for the web page responsiveness. And also we have here the third one, which allows us to make our web page compatible with older versions of Internet Explorer. Actually, those things may sound a bit complicated for now, but you don't have to pay much attention to those tags right now. Alright, let's move on and start to describe different HTML elements. Before we do that, I want to show you how to create comments in the HTML document. Basically, comments are used to describe the code or to make some notes, and also you can use comments to pause the code. To terminate working it. Okay, so to create a comment, you have to open an angle bracket, followed by the exclamation mark. Then we need double dashes. I'm going to insert here some text, let's say headings, because we're going to discuss what the headings are and how to use them in HTML. And then we have to close the comment again using double dashes and the angle bracket, but now without exclamation mark. So now this text is treated as the comment. If I save, then we won't get any text on the page. Actually, in the VS Code, there is a shortcut to create comments. You need to press Ctrl+// and the comment will be generated automatically. Alright, so as we said, we're going to learn about how to use headings in HTML. We have 6 types of headings. Let's go ahead and create the first one. For that, I'm going to use h1 tag with the text heading 1. So if we save, then the text will be displayed. As you can see, its size is bigger than the size of the plain text. Actually, the heading element has some default styles, and to show it, I'm going to use Google Chrome Developer Tools. In order to open it, there are a few different ways. You can either click this little menu icon, then hover over More Tools and select Developer Tools. Or you can use right-click and select Inspect the Page. Or you can just press the F12 button and the Developer Tools will be opened. So as you see at the bottom of the page, there is opened a new window which consists of several parts. Inside the Elements tab, we see the structure of our HTML document. It is placed on the left side of the Developer Tools window. You can find here the comments which we have just created and also the heading element. Actually, we're able to manipulate our code from here. For that, you can use a right click and then choose Edit as HTML. So if I change here the text, let's write test. And then if I hit the Ctrl+Enter, the text will be edited and changed inside here. And also on the page as well. Actually, this kind of editing is not permanent. We cannot change the actual code. If I refresh the page, then we will get the previous content back. Alright. On the right hand side of the Developer Tools, we can find styles of our elements. As we said, by default, the HTML element has some default styles. For example, the display block. Its font size is 2em. It has some margin as well, and etc. Okay, right after the styles, we see another tab called Computed, which basically gives us some additional information about the styles of an element. You can find here that the color of the text is black. Also, the font size is computed in pixels. 2em is equivalent to 32 pixels. And also here are some other default styles as well. Alright, so the Developer Tools is really a helpful and useful tool. Let's get back to our HTML headings. As we said, we can define 6 different types of the heading element. And the next one is represented by the h2 tag. Let's go ahead and open it. And as the content, write heading 2. So if I save, then we will get here the second heading, which actually is slightly smaller than the previous one. By default, it has a smaller font size. If we check it from the developer tools, we will find that its font size is equal to 1.5 EM, which is equivalent to 24 pixels. Alright, in the exact same way we can define the rest of the headings. I'm going to duplicate this line of code 4 times. Actually, in order to duplicate the code, we have to press Shift plus Alt and the down arrow, and the code will be duplicated. Now we have to change the tag names and content. Next one is going to be H3. In order to change the tag names quickly, I'm going to use a multi-cursor. In my case, I should press Ctrl and then I place cursors for several times wherever I want. If the Control key doesn't work for you, then the alternate shortcut could be an Alt key. Okay, let's go ahead and change quickly the tag names and the heading names as well. So if I save, then we will get 6 different heading elements. Alright, so that's all about HTML heading elements. Overall, we have 6 different types of headings. The next element that I want to show you is a paragraph. Let's make here a new comment, paragraph. So in order to create a paragraph, we have to use the p tag. Basically, paragraphs are used to represent some kind of big text. I mean text like the article. I'm going to insert here some dummy text. For that we can use lorem ipsum. It allows us to generate some text. In order to do that, I'm going to use Amat. We have to type here shortcut lorem, and we need to specify how many words we want to insert. Let's say 40. Then if we press the tab, we'll get some dummy text. Okay, so as you see, we got here paragraph on the page. Like headings, the paragraph has also its default styles as well. Alright, as you can see, all the elements that are displayed on the page are placed on a new line. Each element takes up the full width of the page that is available. It happens because headings and paragraphs are the block level elements. In HTML, each element can be considered as a block level or inline level. In the case of the inline elements, they take up the width that is required to display the content of the element, and they are not placed on a new line. As an example of the inline element, we can consider span. Basically, the span tag is used to add a hook to a part of the text. For example, if you want to color some parts of the text from CSS, you can wrap this text with a span element. By default, it won't change anything to the text. Alright, let's insert here hello, then duplicate this line of code and change the content. Make it world. You can see that those two words are placed side by side. They don't take up a new line on the page, they just take up the width that is required to display the content of the element. In order to prove that, I'm going to click this little icon here, which allows us to highlight elements on the page. If I hover over the headings and paragraphs, you will see that they take up full width that is available on the page, because as we said, they are block level elements. As for the span elements, they take up the width that is needed to display the content. So that's the main difference between inline and block level elements. Alright, that's it about paragraphs. Now we are going to talk about lists in HTML. Basically, lists are used quite frequently when you work on building the websites. For example, you may have the list in your navigation. Also, you may have a list on the sidebar, in the footer, and so on. Alright, let's make here a new comment. Lists. In order to create lists, you have to use the UL tag, which stands for the unordered list. And then inside the UL tag, you have to insert LI tag. It stands for the list item. Let's insert here HTML. Then duplicate the list item a couple of times, and instead of the HTML, let's insert here some other technology names like CSS, JavaScript, and React. Alright, so if I save, then the list will be displayed on the page. As you can see, it has some default styles. List items have default bullets. Also, we have some padding and margin. They are used to define some space inside and outside of the element box. Okay, so that's it about how you can create an unordered list in HTML. Besides that, we have another type of HTML list, which is called an ordered list. Let's go ahead and create it. I'm going to duplicate this entire list. The only thing that we have to do is to change the UL tag. Instead of it, we need OL tag, which stands for an ordered list. So if we save, we will get another list, and the only difference that we have between those two lists is that in the case of the ordered list, instead of bullets, we have here proper numbers of the list items. Alright, so actually those are the main types of lists which you may come across in the future. One more thing that I want to show you is how to create nested lists. I mean the list inside of another list. That's quite easy to do. We just need to insert UL element inside another UL element. Let's create here a couple of list items like React, Angular, Vue. Also change the content of the li element. Let's add here libraries and frameworks. So if I save, then we will get a nested list right down below the third item. The interesting thing is that the nested list has some indentation, and instead of black bullets, we have here just circles. Alright, so that's it about lists in HTML. So step by step we're moving forward. We have already learned about a couple of HTML elements. And the next thing that I want to discuss is how to deal with HTML links. Basically, links are a really important part of any website. It allows us to navigate from one page to another, or even from one website to another website. So you should definitely know how this element actually works. Okay, let's create here a new comment, links. Actually, before we start to create links, I want to create some space here on the page in order to make the content visible. For that, I'm going to use a little bit of CSS. So do not worry if you don't understand what this code means. You can just follow me. Let's create an empty paragraph and then use inline styling. We need to pass here the style attribute. And then let's assign to it margin top with value 500 pixels. So now as you can see, we have here some space down below the content. Alright, so the HTML links are represented by anchor tags. I'm going to open it, and by the way, instead of opening tags manually, I'm going to use Amat. Using this tool, you don't have to open an angle bracket each time. You just need to write tag name like so. And then if we press the tab, the element will be automatically created for us. So in the future, I will use Amat in order to create elements in kind of simple way. Alright, so as you can see, link element has an attribute called href. Actually, regarding element attributes, we have not talked about so far. Each HTML element can have different attributes. Basically, they can provide some additional information about the element. Also, they should be passed in an opening tag, and they are provided by name-value pairs. Values should be passed inside the quotes. So, using the href attribute, we can define the destination address of the link. You can specify here the address of a different page or different website. Before we pass here any of the addresses, let's just display the link on the page. Insert here some content. Let's say, click me. If we save, then the link should be displayed on the page. As you can see, it looks in a kind of different way than the rest of the elements. It has some default styles. I mean, its color is blue, it's underlined, and if we hover over it, the type of cursor will be changed into a pointer. If I click the link, then by default the page is going to be reloaded, and also the color of a link should be changed. So actually it is the default behavior of the link element. If we don't pass anything inside the href attribute, then by clicking the link the page should always refresh. If you want to avoid reloading the page each time, we can pass here the hash sign. Now if I click again, the page won't reload. In general, hash sign is used to connect links with the different sections of the web page with the help of ID attribute. Okay, now let's see how we can move from one page to another website. For that we have to pass here the URL of any website. Let's say https example.com. So if I click the link, then we will leave the current web page and we will go to the website that we indicated here in the href attribute. Alright, so in this case we have left the current web page and we moved to the website, but sometimes when you click the link, the new tab is opened in the browser and you can go to the website in a new tab. I mean without closing the current one. In order to do that, we have to use another attribute called target, which should be equal to _blank. Now if I click the link, then the new tab will be open in the browser and we will be able to go to the website without closing the current web page. Alright, so that's it about HTML links. You will use them lots of times in the future. So once we are done with the links in HTML, now I'm going to move on and show you how to work with the images. Like the links, images are very important as well, because every modern website includes lots of images. So you should definitely know how to deal with them. Let's make here new comment, images. So images can be defined with the img tag. Unlike the previous tags, the img tag doesn't have a closing tag, so it is called a self-closing tag. As you can see, by default there are generated two different attributes. The first one is called source attribute, which is used to indicate the path of an image, or maybe it can be the URL of the image, I mean the web address. As for the alt attribute, it specifies the alternate text for an image. So if for some reason the image is not displayed on the page, then the user will be able to see the text which will pass here. Okay, let's at first consider how the source attribute works. As we said, you can specify here the path of an image. Actually, I'm going to download an image and store it in our working folder. Let's search for, let's say, HTML5 logo PNG. Let's go ahead and download one of them and store it in the working folder as html.png. So if we want to display the image, then we have to pass the path of it in the source attribute. In this particular case, we have to indicate the name of the image because our HTML file and the image are placed in the same directory. So let's insert here html.png. So if I save, then the image should be displayed on the page. As you can see, it is placed right after the link element. It means that both elements are inline level elements. Okay, so that's the way how you can display an image on the page. Now let's go ahead and talk about the alt attribute. As we said, it allows us to display some text on the page if for some reason the image is not displayed. For example, if we insert here some text, let's say HTML5 logo, and then if we change the name of the image, then it will be no longer displayed, and instead of that we will get here the text that we have assigned to an alt attribute. Okay, let's get back here the original name of the image, and now suppose that we have an image in a separate folder. Let's create a new folder, call it images, and then move the image into that folder. Now, as you can see, it's no longer displayed because inside the source attribute we have an incorrect path. At first we have to indicate the name of the folder, images, and then after the slash we have to specify the name of the file. Now the image is displayed back. Alright, the next thing that I want to show you is that we can manipulate the size of the image from HTML using width and height attributes. So if we pass here width attribute, let's assign to it 150. Actually, 150 here means that we define the width of the image as 150 pixels. So as you can see, the size of the image is decreased. In this case, height is set as auto, and if we define it manually from here, if we set it as 100, then the height of the image will be changed as well. But as you can see, the image doesn't look good, so eventually I prefer and I recommend to work with the images, to work on styles of the image from CSS. Okay, let's get rid of the height attribute. Next up, I want to show you how to use links with images. We can use the image as the content of the link. I'm going to wrap the image with the link element. And then let's pass here the same URL which we used above. Now if I click the image, we will be moved to the website. But if we pass here the path of the image instead of the URL, and then if we click the image, it will be opened up in the browser. Alright, that's it about images. Now it's time to discuss one of the most important topics in HTML, forms. On almost every website you should meet forms. For example, when you try to register somewhere, you have to fill up different types of input fields. Also, when you need to log in again, you need to fill up some forms. So without forms, it's hard to create an interactive web page. Let's go ahead and describe what kind of forms do we have in HTML. First of all, let's make here the comment forms. So when you want to create forms, the first thing that you have to do is to open the form element. As you can see, by default, VS Code has generated an attribute called the action. Actually, this attribute is used to specify where to send the data of form when a form is submitted. In HTML5, this attribute is no longer required, so I'm going to get rid of it from here. Okay, so the form element is kind of wrapper for different input elements. Now I'm going to create the label element inside of it. Basically, this tag defines a label for an element. As you can see, it has an attribute called for. It specifies which form element a label is bound to. In order to bind a label to an input element, for and ID attributes, ID of the input element, should have the same values. For now it's not quite important, so let's just get rid of this attribute from here. As the content of the label, I'm going to insert, let's say, first name. Next up, I'm going to create an input. It creates an input field where the user can enter some data. As you see, it has a type attribute which by default is set as text, and actually we're going to leave it as it is. So if I save, then we will get the label and input on the page. As you can see, they are placed too close to previous elements, so we need to create some space, and for that I'm going to introduce you to a new HTML tag called BR. It allows us to create the line breaks. So now we have some space here. Besides the BR tag, we also have HR tag, which is used again for separation of the elements. We can create a horizontal line using this tag. let's add here one more br tag and then continue to work on the forms. Alright, now I'm going to duplicate those two elements and then change the content of the label. Let's write here last name. So as you can see, we have here two groups of inputs. They are placed side by side because those elements are inline elements. Now I want to place the second group on a new line, and for that I'm going to wrap each group with a div element, which actually is a block level element, and basically it allows us to create some divisions in our HTML document. Mostly div elements are used to wrap some groups of the elements, and they are very frequently used in the real world. So if I wrap both groups with div elements, then both groups will be placed on a new line. Actually, I think we need some space between them, so let's go ahead and use again br tag. Alright, next I'm going to show you another type of input. Let's go ahead and duplicate this group, then change the text of the label, use your email, and also change type of input, make it email. So at a glance, nothing is changed here. We have the same type of inputs, but in fact the difference between text and email types is that there is added a little validation for the email input in HTML5. This validation works once we submit the form, and I'll show you it a bit later. Okay, let's duplicate this code again. The next input type that I want to show you is a password. Let's change here the label, make it password, and change the value of the type as well. We need password. So if I type here something, then it should be hidden like it is in a real world passwords input fields. Alright, before we move on and demonstrate how other form elements work, I want to mention that we are able to define the values of input fields by default from the HTML code, and we can do that using an attribute called value. So if I type here something, let's say enter the first name, then it should be displayed in the input field. Previously, this attribute was used mostly as a placeholder, but it's not quite handy because you need to clear the input before you start to write something. For that there was used JavaScript, and overall it was quite a painful process. In HTML5, thanks to a new attribute called Placeholder, we no longer need to do the mentioned things. You can see that the text is gray, and when we start to type, it disappears. Actually, you're able to use this attribute for almost every type of input element. Alright, let's go ahead and continue to describe other types of form elements. First of all, I'm going to duplicate this group of elements. Let's change the content of the label, make it message. And also let's get rid of the input element from here. So the next element that I want to show you is called the text area. It gives us a relatively bigger input field, so we are able to enter some bunch of text. Let's assign to it placeholder attribute with some text, enter message. So if we save, then we will get the text area on the page. As you can see, the size of the field is bigger than the other inputs, and also we are able to manipulate the size of it from the bottom right corner of the field. Okay, so that's it about text area. Next, I want to show you another type of input, which is called checkbox. Let's go ahead and duplicate the div element one more time. Change the content of the label, make it check. Then get rid of the text area and create the input element instead of it with a type checkbox. So as you can see, the checkbox is displayed as a square box, and we can check it by clicking on it. As you remember, we talked about some connection between the label and input elements using for and id attributes. And now I'm going to show you what this actually means. Let's assign to label 4 attributes and assign to each check. After that, we have to assign to input element ID attribute, which should have the exact same value. So let's write here check as well. So now those two elements are connected, and what this connection actually means is that if we click the label, then the checkbox will be checked automatically. Basically, this technique is used in CSS when you want to create some click event. Alright, let's move on to the next type of input element, which is a radio button. If we change the type of an input element and write radio instead of a checkbox, then we should get the radio button on the page. Mostly, radio buttons are represented in radio groups, collections of radio buttons, to select one of the options. In general, only one radio button in a group can be selected at the same time. So if we duplicate the input element and then check both radio buttons, then we will be able to check both of them. Normally, it's not what we want. As we said, we need only one radio button to be selected at the same time, and for that we have to assign to both input elements name attributes, and both of them should have the same values. So now if I check one button, and then if I try to select another one, only one radio button will be selected. Alright, that's it about the radio buttons. Let's move on and demonstrate the last type of input element, which is a submit. Let's insert here BR tag, and then after it create a new input element, which should have the type submit. Actually, this type of input element creates the button, which allows us to submit the form. Besides the type attribute, we need here a value. With the help of the value attribute, we will display some text on the button. So if I click the button, then just the page will be reloaded, but in real world, when you program those form elements, the submit button is used to get the data that the user enters in input fields and store this data in the database. Also, we said that there is added a little validation to email input in HTML5. So if I type here something without the @ sign and then click the submit, we will get a little pop-up saying that we should include @ sign in the email address. Okay, so actually that's it about form elements in HTML. We have overviewed some commonly used input elements which you might need in the future. Alright, so we're about to finish talking about the HTML. We have described lots of different elements, and now lastly I'm going to talk about HTML5 semantic elements. Actually, semantic elements are the elements which clearly describe their meanings to the browser and developer as well. It is recommended to use them for search engine optimization purposes as well. HTML5 semantic elements are supported in all modern web browsers. Let's go ahead and describe some of them. I'm going to comment the entire code out and actually start from scratch. I'm going to build a standard structure of the web page, and throughout this process I will show you some of these semantic elements. The first element that I want to show you is header. It specifies header for a document or some of the sections on the page. Let's insert here h1 heading element with the text website heading. So at a glance there is nothing special about the header element, it's just a block level element, but the advantage of it is that it describes very well what kind of content it includes. The next semantic element is nav. As its name suggests, this element is used to create a navigation. So I'm going to insert here list with some navigation items. Let's insert here li element followed by link, and then insert here home. Duplicate it for a couple of times and change the items. I'm going to pass here about us, blog, and contact. Alright, so for now this list doesn't look like navigation because it's just pure HTML. We don't use here any of the CSS stuff. But right now it's not the point. I just try to introduce you to HTML5 semantic elements. Okay, next we have a section element which defines section in a document. It groups some content and mostly this content has the heading. So let's insert here h2 heading element with the text section heading. And also I'm going to create a little paragraph with some lorem ipsum dummy text. Alright, that's it about this section. Next, I want to use the article. In general, this element is used to define some independent, or in other words, some self-contained content. As an example of an article element, we can consider, let's say, blog posts, newspaper articles, and so on. So let's insert here some text, open p element, and pass here some dummy text. Next up, I want to show you an element called aside. This element mostly is used to create some content, let's say aside from the main content. In most cases we use it to define the sidebar. So let's insert here list with some list items. Let's pass here some technology names, HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and React. Alright, again this element doesn't look like the sidebar, it's just placed after the previous content, but I hope that you get the idea of how to use it in a real world. Okay, the last element that I want to show you is footer. It mostly is placed down below the web page and it defines the footer for a document. But sometimes you may see it at the end of some section as well. Alright, as usual inside the footer we have some copyright text. Let's open p element and write here copyright. Then in order to insert here the copyright sign, I'm going to use HTML entity, which should be written like so. We need ampersand, copy, followed by the semicolon, and then write code and create, all rights reserved. So here we have our footer. Alright, so that's it. I have shown you some of the commonly used HTML5 semantic elements, and actually we have finished talking about the HTML. I hope it was interesting and you got some basic knowledge about how to create the structure and content for your web page. Again, when you want to start to learn web development, the first thing that you need to do is to learn HTML. Alright. If you enjoyed this video, then please thumbs up, comment below, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell to get notified about coming tutorials. Okay, see you next time.